Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos. As punishment for committing a universal crime, the man was forced to marry an alien woman. Mr. Jace Mercer, you stand accused of crimes against sentient harmony. Paragraph 9, subsection 3.2, willfully instigating political unrest via interspecies sarcasm, unauthorized affection, and the illegal deployment of charm in demilitarized flirtation zones. How do you plead? Jace shifted uncomfortably in the restraining pod, which was padded, glossy, and vibrated every 5 seconds to remind him he was not, in fact, at a spa. He raised his cuffed hands and gave a dramatic shrug. Guilty of being irresistible. Not sure about the rest. A silence spread across the chamber like a bored disease. 32 galactic delegates watched from their floating thrones, some blinking with 6 eyes, others steaming lightly in containment fields. The presiding judge, a cube of sentient gas named Magistrate Blorp, vibrated with what might have been disapproval. Let the record show the accused is attempting humor again. Just trying to keep things light. Your gassiness. There was a soft whooshing as an aide facepalmed somewhere in the observation balcony. The trial, which had already lasted 12 solar hours, proceeded with all the grace of a collapsing neutron star. Witnesses came and went, some real, some projected. One accidentally beamed in from a cooking show on channel 998X, and all of them painted a picture of Jace Mercer that he found only mildly flattering. There were references to an unapproved romantic rendezvous with the ambassador of the Gelthi, an impromptu karaoke brawl with the Minister of Trade from Relax 7, and something about an inflammatory use of puns at a cultural exchange dinner that led to a temporary black hole forming out of sheer awkwardness. When the defense AI started glitching and began playing jazz, Jace took that as a cosmic sign. "May I say a few words?" he asked, voice echoing off the walls. The judge vibrated noncommittally. "I was trying to bring people together," Jace said. "Laugh? If I could get them to see each other past the weird eyes and tentacles and dietary restrictions, we'd stop shooting photon missiles every time someone mispronounced a name. But apparently, saving the galaxy is frowned upon, unless you do it with a laser gun and a dramatic soundtrack." The prosecutor, a sentient mushroom in a tailored suit, tapped its spore pad. "Your criminal record includes a legally binding marriage proposal to the Duchess of Blanax Prime, which you issued during a game of zero-gravity darts. That was taken out of context. It was broadcast live. Still, context." The judge made a rumbling noise. "The court acknowledges your enthusiasm. However, your actions have disrupted 3 treaties, 12 trade routes, and caused diplomatic embarrassment of such magnitude that the word whoopsie has been banned in 7 languages. Jace tilted his head. "That's honestly impressive. I'd put that on a resume." "Silence, accused," he saluted. "Silent. In light of your unique skills and the council's need for symbolic gestures of peace, your sentence shall be thus. You are to be wed to Princess Zethira of Thalathar, daughter of the Obsidian Spire, warden of the Deep Moons, keeper of the code." Jace blinked. "Come again?" The sentence echoed through the chamber like a bad joke with a long punchline. "Marriage, Mr. Mercer. Binding and immediate." Jace stood there, stunned into actual silence for the first time in recorded history. "You're punishing me with matrimony? Correct? That feels excessive. Have you met me? I lose socks in singularities. I once dated a woman who turned out to be a projection of my ship's mood lighting. You want me to marry an alien princess? That sounds like a terrible idea for her." "The union has been negotiated as a peace accord," the judge replied. "Failure to comply will result in memory dissolution and assignment to asteroid reclamation duty in the Denther Belt." "Well, when you put it like that." Jace sighed. "Do I at least get to meet her before I vow eternal loyalty?" The chamber doors hissed open. She stepped into the hall like a storm in slow motion, tall, cloaked in a gown woven from shifting starlight, her silver-white hair falling in straight lines over her shoulders. Her skin shimmered like polished stone. Her ears, long and tapered, swept back like the wings of a predator mid-flight. Her eyes were pale violet, and they regarded Jace the way one might regard a wet sock stuck to the hull of a luxury cruiser. "This is the one?" she asked, her voice crystalline and cold. The judge made a sound like boiling fog. "Indeed." She didn't look at Jace when she spoke again. "He smells like engine grease and unresolved trauma." "Accurate," Jace said. and you smell like existential dread and incredibly high standards. This is going to be fun." She turned to the judge. "I request a duel instead." "Denied," the judge said. "The paperwork has already been filed." Zethira stared at Jace for a long, silent moment. "Are you here to break me," she asked, "or to save us both?" "I was hoping to just survive the week, honestly." The wedding ceremony was held that evening on a floating platform orbiting the ceremonial moon of Corval. Guests arrived in shimmering cruisers and diplomatic shuttles, each bringing rare offerings, confused expressions, and a vague sense that they were attending either a political milestone or a very expensive hostage situation. The officiant was a crustacean with 12 degrees in theology and 3 in improv comedy. He kept making puns in binary. Jace fumbled his vows twice and nearly set his ceremonial robe on fire when he leaned too close to a hovering unity torch. Zethira stood still as a statue, her eyes never leaving his face, which only made him more flustered. When it came time for the kiss, she tilted her head precisely 30 degrees. "Let's not make this worse than it already is," she said. "Oh, but I was just getting into the spirit of—" Her lips touched his for exactly 0.8 seconds. It felt like kissing the North Pole of a supercomputer. "Wow," he said, blinking. "That was cold. I aimed for neutral." They were declared married to the applause of many and the enthusiastic tentacle waving of a species that reproduced via photosynthesis and poetry. Later, on the diplomatic cruiser bound for Thalathar, Jace sat on the edge of the guest suite's luxury oxygen couch, staring out at the stars. Zethira stood by the viewport, arms crossed, silhouetted in the pale blue glow of warp light. "Just to be clear," Jace said, "this isn't going to involve me being assassinated on our honeymoon, right?" "No," she replied. "Not yet." The cruiser broke through Thalathar's atmospheric veil with a low hum, its hull shimmering as it slipped beneath the continent-sized crystal clouds. Jace pressed his face against the viewport like a curious child, fogging the glass. "I think your planet is trying to seduce me." Zethira, seated rigidly across from him, with a hollow slate glowing in her lap, did not look up. "It's not." "Could have fooled me. Look at those cliffs. Are they supposed to sparkle that aggressively?" "They're bioluminescent. The glow is a natural defense response. Thalathar does not trust strangers." "Ah, good to know I have something in common with your geography." A gentle chime rang through the cabin as the cruiser entered the Sovereign landing corridor, flanked by twin guard drones whose wings pulsed like jellyfish. Below, towering cities etched into crystalline mountains glinted in the lilac light of twin suns. Roads of liquid glass threaded through them like veins, and Jace found himself uncharacteristically quiet. As they docked at the royal platform, a welcoming procession awaited, elegantly armored officials with ceremonial staffs, each blinking in sync. It was either deeply symbolic or a planetary allergy symptom. Jace wasn't sure. The ramp hissed open. Zethira stood without a word, adjusting her cloak with precise, almost mathematical movements. Jace followed, tugging at his formal collar, which someone had insisted should have miniature spinning satellites embedded in it. They were currently orbiting his throat like anxious moons. "You will walk 3 steps behind me," she said without turning. "Symbolic hierarchy? No. I just walk very fast." The procession led them through the Plaza of Accord into the Heartspire Palace, a structure carved entirely from obsidian crystal, humming softly with the frequency of the planet's core. The walls whispered in musical tones that seemed to react to thought. "That wall just complimented my posture," Jace muttered. "I think I love it." "You're likely hallucinating," Zethira said. "The spire tunes itself to the psyche of new arrivals. It reveals inclinations." "So it does like my posture." They entered a long hall adorned with statues of past rulers, all of whom looked like Zethira's distant cousins, elegant, elongated, and vaguely annoyed. At the end stood a throne shaped like a blooming starflower, surrounded by advisors whose billowed despite the lack of wind. Jace recognized none of them, but they all looked at him the way one might examine a suspect package left in a quantum elevator. "This is Jace Mercer," Zethira said. "By decree, he is my husband." There was a silence so deep it sucked the heat from the room. An elderly advisor stepped forward. His ears were longer than hers, curving behind his head like twin crescents. "We had hoped you would challenge the decree, Your Highness." "I considered it," Zethira replied. Then I imagined explaining to 32 star systems that our treaty collapsed over a refusal to share domestic space with a man who thinks diplomacy involves karaoke. For the record, Jace said, raising a hand, I did win that karaoke. No one laughed. Even the palace's ambient humming seemed to shift to a more judgmental tone. They were led to adjacent living quarters, a political compromise apparently. Jace entered his suite and was immediately greeted by a hovering orb that identified itself as Habitation Protocol Interface Module Beta 7, or Betty. Please refrain from singing, it said cheerfully. Thalatharian walls are emotionally resonant and may become despondent. Same, Jace muttered, tossing himself onto the bed, which immediately adjusted its temperature to match his mood. It became cold and slightly sarcastic. For the next several days, Jace found himself drowning in ceremonial duties that were mostly designed to confuse or exhaust him. He posed beside obelisks, nodded during treaty recitals, sampled floating cuisine that tried to leave his mouth mid-chew, and was forced into a unity dance that involved synchronized eyebrow movements and very aggressive hopping. Zethira attended all events with icy poise, never smiling, never faltering, always exactly 12 seconds ahead of the protocol. Her people watched her like a goddess carved in logic. Jace, meanwhile, nearly knocked over a relic during a peace ritual and was politely tackled by a monk. Between events, he explored the palace. It was a maze of sound-reactive halls, telepathic fountains, and one overly friendly plant that tried to marry his shoe. He discovered a library that recorded your thoughts and shelved them for future rereading. His shelf had 3 books titled Mild Panic, one titled What If She's Just Pretending to Hate Me, and a 4th blank one that glowed ominously. One night, unable to sleep, he wandered out onto a balcony and found Zethira already there, staring up at the moons. Her hair caught the light like it was woven from ice and nebula. "Can't sleep either?" he asked, leaning on the railing. She didn't look at him. Rest is difficult with so many expectations pressing in. Try sleeping next to a wall that hums the soundtrack of your inner anxiety. Makes counting sheep feel like an invasion of privacy. She turned her gaze to him, unreadable. "You're not what I expected. Most people expect me to be taller, or quieter, or less me." A pause. "My brother used to make jokes like that," she said softly. "Before he died." Jace's voice dropped. "I didn't know. I wouldn't expect you to." She looked back at the sky. "He was supposed to take the throne. I was the spare. When he died, they pushed me forward, and I walked because I thought it was the only way to hold this place together. And now they've married you off to a guy who thinks sarcasm is a survival skill. It is. On Thalathar, emotion is weakness. But sarcasm? It slips under the code's notice. You wield it like a blade, hoping no one sees you're bleeding." Jace looked at her for a long time. "If I told you I was trying to understand you, not just survive you, would that count as progress?" Zethira gave the faintest smile. "Only if you stop flirting with the architecture." "Can't promise that. The walls here get me." A soft chime echoed from within the palace, low and rhythmic. She straightened. "That's the council summons. Middle of the night emergency meeting? They only ring that tone when there's been blood in the Hall of Silence. Is that as ominous as it sounds?" She looked at him. "Worse." He stood. "Do I get to come along, or do I stay here and argue with Betty about my bedtime?" She turned to go. "Come if you like, but stay behind me." "Symbolic hierarchy?" "No. The last time I entered the hall after an alert, someone tried to stab the air next to me. I'd prefer you got stabbed instead." "Your romantic optimism is really growing on me." The Hall of Silence wasn't silent. As Jace followed 3 paces behind Zethira, he heard what sounded like a whispering wind trapped in an argument with itself. The air felt too alert, like even the molecules were holding their breath. Jace had once been thrown out of a Thranxian casino for asking if the roulette table was rigged. It had spun wildly, caught fire, and accused him of slander. This hallway had the same kind of unpredictable tension. "Just to clarify," he said as they approached the carved archway lined with crystalline runes, "if someone tries to stab me, am I allowed to stab back? Or is that going to break a treaty with someone?" "You may defend yourself," Zethira replied. "Try not to look smug about it. Smug is my resting face." Inside, 6 of Thalathar's high advisors stood in a crescent arc before the obsidian conduit, a monolithic slab of pulsing dark energy. On its surface, projected faintly, was a flickering image of Lord Vectress, a senior counselor with ears so long they once trailed into his soup during a diplomatic brunch. He always looked slightly surprised, like someone had just explained how a toaster works. The breach occurred in sub-level Theta, Vectress was saying. One guard down, one archivist missing. No trace of the intruder. Let me guess, Jace whispered to Zethira. Your security system didn't detect them because they were wearing a cloak of obvious plot advancement. She didn't laugh. She also didn't tell him to stop talking, which was something. Another advisor stepped forward. Cyril, a stern woman with a voice that sounded like sandpaper reading poetry. The intruder bypassed 3 biometric locks and left behind a fragment of Thralic code, one no longer used by loyalists. Zethira frowned. The Resistance. Jace raised a hand. For those of us just catching up, who exactly are we resisting? Zethira turned to him. A faction of isolationists who believe Thalathar should sever all ties with the Galactic Council. They oppose the treaty, they oppose me, and now apparently they're breaking into my archives. And I'm guessing this is not about overdue library books. They took a data shard from the sealed vault. What kind of shard? She didn't answer. That, Jace thought, was probably worse than any answer she could. They spent the next hour combing through the palace's internal tracking system, an organic neural web called Thorn, which occasionally paused to ask deeply philosophical questions like, do you believe purpose is chosen or assigned, before displaying surveillance footage? Eventually they found it, a shadowy figure entering the vault, wearing a phase-cloaking suit that blinked every few seconds like it had a low battery. It moved with the smooth precision of someone who definitely wasn't there to reshelve data logs. Zethira stared at the screen. That's not just a rebel, that's a Black Veil operative. Sounds fancy. They're trained to dismantle governments in 12 hours or less. Okay, Jace said, rubbing the back of his neck, but can they dismantle a very mildly sarcastic ex-criminal in 12 hours or less? Zethira sighed. You'd probably slow them down. They've never accounted for improv. The meeting dissolved with orders issued, protocols triggered, and a few advisors making ritualistic huffing noises that apparently signified urgent concern. As they left the hall, Jace fell into step beside Zethira. So, he said, do I get a ceremonial dagger or just moral support? You're not required to participate. I wasn't required to marry you either, and yet here we are. Besides, I'm already involved. If this rebellion brings down your throne, I end up either dead or divorced. Possibly both in reverse order. Zethira stopped walking. Why do you care? He blinked. Because someone's trying to steal your life's work, destabilize your planet, and possibly blow something up. And that's my job. I don't like competition. Her expression didn't change, but she resumed walking. The next morning, Jace was introduced to the Spousal Security Protocol team, which included 2 stern guards, a 3-legged drone named Nip, and a small, dense man called Groll, who insisted on referring to Jace as High Spouse. Groll's job was to monitor Jace's vitals, track his movements, and remind him not to press glowing buttons. Jace ignored him immediately. They traveled to sub-level Theta via an atmospheric rail, essentially a gravity slide shaped like a glowing intestine. Jace screamed for most of the ride, then blamed it on the wind. The vault, now sealed and brimming with scanning fields, looked like the inside of a philosopher's brain. Floating memory orbs drifted in containment fields, whispering history in ancient Thalatharian. Zethira examined the shelves, pausing before an empty socket. The shard they took contains fragments of the First Accord, she said. Sounds official. It predates our involvement with the Galactic Council. It was a pact between our people and something far older. Jace squinted. Define older. Something we no longer speak of. That's not vague or ominous at all. Back in the palace, Zethira reviewed incident logs while Jace tried to distract Betty into giving him access to restricted files by pretending to be emotionally vulnerable. It didn't work, but Betty offered him a therapy pamphlet. Later that night, Zethira summoned Jace to the observatory. He found her seated at the planetary charting table, surrounded by holograms of star systems and defense grids. They're not just trying to bring down the treaty, she said. They're looking for leverage. If they reveal the contents of that shard, we risk losing the Council's trust. Because of what's in it? Because of who we made the pact with. Thalathar once bent the knee to a species older than stars, the mourned. We swore silence, obedience, and secrecy. And now someone wants to break that oath? She looked at him. If they succeed, the mourned may return, and they are not interested in diplomacy. Jace sat down, whistling low. Well, that explains the hums in the walls. You built a palace over cosmic trauma. It was already here. They sat in silence for a moment, both staring at the stars. Jace finally said, if it helps, I once swore silence to a shipboard AI that knew all my browser history. Didn't last 3 hours. Zethira gave a small, exasperated laugh. You are impossible, but helpful, debatable. As the stars pulsed overhead, Jace leaned back, watching the cosmos swirl like a question with too many answers. So, how do we stop a rebellion, save a marriage, and keep an ancient alien god from noticing we broke up with them? Zethira looked at him. One step at a time. Right, he said. Let's hope step 1 doesn't involve exploding. You're telling me we're going to sneak into a rebel hideout through the old maintenance tunnels under the obsidian spire? Jace asked, adjusting the borrowed armor that made him look like an overcooked space beetle. That's not a metaphor, right? Because sometimes you people say things like ride the photon, and it ends up involving rituals and vegetable sacrifices. It's not a metaphor, Zethira said, adjusting a pulse beacon on her belt. And for the record, the vegetable sacrifices are highly symbolic. Jace tapped the side of his helmet. I swear this thing is whispering insults at me. It's a standard Thalatharian tactical helm. It reads your neural feedback and recalibrates accordingly. It just called me emotionally undercooked. Zethira walked past him into the stairwell, ignoring the hiss of closing security doors behind them. It's not wrong. They descended through a sealed shaft lit by bioorganic veins that pulsed blue with every step. Grohl, the security specialist with the personality of a stubborn asteroid, led the way, carrying a device that looked suspiciously like a toaster strapped to a drone wing. Scanner indicates 4 life forms ahead, Grohl said. One appears to be chewing. Recommend caution. I always recommend snacks during a stakeout, Jace muttered. Promotes morale. They entered a chamber, half swallowed by aid. The walls were lined with archive alcoves, and the air was thick with the faint scent of ozone and disuse. At the far end, a shadow moved, tall, lean, and wrapped in stealth plating that flickered in and out of visibility like a half-hearted ghost. Zethira raised her hand. Don't fire. I wasn't going to, Jace whispered. I left my heroics in my other pants. The figure stepped forward and removed her hood. A Thalatharian woman younger than Zethira, with ears not quite as long but eyes just as calculating. Saren, Zethira said, her voice flat. Hello, sister, the woman replied. I see your exile comes with accessories now. Jace raised a hand. Hi, accessory here. Does a lot of things. Diplomacy, sabotage, bad decisions under pressure. Saren ignored him. You shouldn't be here. This path leads only to disappointment. Then it's on brand for me, Jace muttered. We're here for the shard, Zethira said. You know what its release would mean. I know what silence has cost us, Saren replied. We bow to the council, but it wasn't the council that protected us when the mourned came. It was an agreement carved in desperation. Zethira stepped forward. The mourned were bound for a reason. You would unbind them for a message no one will survive to receive? They're already stirring, sister. Your marriage won't save this planet. Hey, Jace cut in. As the unwilling spouse in question, I'd like to propose a third option. One where nobody summons ancient existential threats and we all go home slightly confused but generally alive. Saren hesitated. Then she said, You've changed, Zethira. You almost sound like him. Zethira's expression didn't shift. He's dead? You would join him? There was no answer. Saren turned and vanished into a side corridor, the shadows swallowing her like she'd never been there. They returned to the palace in uneasy silence. That evening, Jace found himself in the spire's old observatory, trying to decode the silence between him and the swirling cosmos. I never had a sibling, he said when Zethira eventually joined him, unless you count my bunkmate at Reform Academy, but he mostly communicated through snoring. Saren was always brilliant, she replied. Too brilliant. She believed she could reshape the world by sheer will. Sounds exhausting. She once tried to reprogram the palace AI to speak in iambic pentameter. Okay, now I like her. Zethira leaned against the railing. She wants change. I understand that, but she's looking backward to find it. Well, you can't steer a ship by staring at its wake. She gave him a look. "It's an old Terran saying," he explained, "usually applied by drunk pilots, often right before crashing into something valuable." "I see." They were quiet for a while, listening to the soft harmonic resonance of the planetary defense grid realigning above. Jace spoke again. "When you told me this marriage was punishment, I believed you. I thought I was being chained to a stranger as a warning label. But you're not a warning. You're a beacon." That was oddly poetic. I had a moment. It passed. She didn't smile, but she did look slightly less like someone balancing a universe on her spine. "You're not what I expected either." I get that a lot, usually before someone throws something. Later that night, an emergency alert rang through the spire. A section of the planetary archives had been breached. Again, only this time, the intruders had left something behind. The artifact was shaped like a prism, humming softly with old power. It pulsed as Jace approached, reacting to his presence. "It's resonating with your biofield," the technician said nervously. "That shouldn't happen." Zethira narrowed her eyes. "No, it shouldn't." The artifact suddenly emitted a projection, a star map impossibly ancient, showing points of collapse along dead systems. Then a single voice echoed from it, speaking in a language Jace didn't understand, but somehow felt deep in his chest like the thrum of a memory not his own. "What did it say?" he asked, shaken. Zethira looked at him. It said, "The bound one stirs, the blood pact is broken." "Well," Jace said, "that doesn't sound like a birthday greeting." Grohl made a choking sound. "The bound one is part of the mourned mythology. If it's stirring, then we have less time than we thought," Zethira finished. "Great," Jace said. "So to review, rebel sibling, ancient evil, interstellar politics, and me, a guy who once got stuck in an airlock because he challenged a door to a staring contest." Zethira looked at him. "We may need that level of stubbornness." "Good," he said, "because I'm fresh out of strategy, but I have an infinite supply of recklessness." She didn't argue. Not that night. The moment the artifact's projection ended, the spire's warning sirens activated with a sound that could only be described as a choir of panicked teapots. Jace flinched and looked at Zethira. "Okay, so I'm just gonna say it. We're probably not getting a honeymoon, are we?" Zethira didn't answer. She was already moving, issuing commands into her comlink, summoning the Defense Corps, and rerouting power from the diplomatic gardens to planetary shields. Somewhere in the palace, a dignitary's pet shrubbery stopped glowing and started pouting. Jace followed her into the command chamber, where holograms of Thalathar's orbit lit up with red flares. One of the advisors waved a hand through the display. "Long-range scans confirm. There's a disturbance beyond the outer ring. Something massive is forming in subspace." "Please don't say the word rift," Jace muttered. "That word never leads to good things." "Subspace rift," the advisor confirmed grimly. "Perfect. Just what I ordered." Zethira stepped into the center of the chamber and called up a projection of the shard again. "This was left for us to find. The rebels aren't just trying to disrupt peace. They're trying to wake the bound one of the mourned." "Wake like breakfast time?" Jace asked. "Because I'm really good at pressing snooze buttons." "If it completes its emergence," Zethira said, "Thalathar will fracture. The code won't protect us. Politics won't matter." "And I thought meeting your family was the hard part." Jace felt it, the pull in his chest, like a tug toward something vast and old and lonely. It wasn't fear exactly. It was the knowledge that something beyond explanation was watching him, as if he were the punchline to a joke written by a collapsing star. Grohl handed him a pulse launcher. "You'll need this." Jace took it. "If I accidentally vaporize myself, tell Betty she was my least favorite AI." "She already knows," Grohl said. Zethira turned to Jace. "We're going into the heart of the fault line. That's where the energy spike is focused. If we disrupt the ritual, we might close the rift." "If? Hope is a calculation, one I'm willing to wager on you." That's the nicest, terrifying thing anyone's ever said to me. They boarded a vessel small enough to maneuver between subspace breaches, but strong enough to survive temporal distortion. It was also painted a shade of diplomatic beige that made Jace feel vaguely disrespected. The ride was turbulent. Space folded in ways that made Jace question if his internal organs were still on speaking terms. But they reached the breach, where reality bent like melted glass, and the rebel fleet hovered in silence, forming a protective ring around the rift. Saren's flagship is at the center, Zethira said, so we fly straight into the angry family reunion and hope nobody throws cosmic lightning. They transmitted docking codes and, after a very tense silence, were granted access. Saren met them in the command bay. Her hair was tied back, her expression unreadable. I knew you'd come. Can't resist a dramatic confrontation, Jace said, especially when there's a chance someone might monologue. Saren looked at him. The bound one responds to your biofield. That wasn't a coincidence. You've been marked. I've been marked before, Jace said, usually by angry exes. Zethira stepped between them. You're gambling with a force you don't understand. The Morn don't grant favor. They consume. That's what they do. Saren didn't flinch. They were promised silence, but we speak now. We speak to be heard. A tremor rattled the ship. The rift began to pulse faster. A shape was forming within it, tall, hollow-eyed, a construct of thought and despair and memory, too massive to fully see. Oh good, Jace said. A cosmic ghost skyscraper. That's exactly what I wanted today. The ship shook again. Alarms wailed, lights flickered. The bound one was pushing through. Zethira grabbed Jace's hand. We have one chance. The shard is linked to you. If you confront it, deny the pact, it might withdraw. I'm flattered, but also, what? You break the cycle by refusing to honor the past. Jace stepped toward the artifact, his pulse pounding. The bound one's voice entered his mind, deep and cold and endless. Speak your vow. Jace closed his eyes. I'm not the one who made that vow. I'm the one breaking it. Not in hatred, but because we're more than our oaths. We choose. And I choose not to be afraid of you. The rift pulsed, then cracked. Energy surged backward into the artifact. The bound one screamed without sound and imploded into itself like a dying star apologizing too late. The ship went still. Saren collapsed to her knees, stunned. It listened to you. Jace helped her up. Maybe next time ask it for dinner before awakening it from eons of slumber. They returned to Thalathar in silence, the rift sealed, the shard inert. The High Council convened, declared Zethira's decision justified, and officially recognized the peace treaty not just as politics, but as principle. Later, on the balcony of the spire, Jace leaned on the railing beside Zethira. Well, he said, I saved the world with a speech. That's gotta count for something. It counts, Zethira said, but you'll still have to do the dishes. Reasonable. She turned to him. You're not a punishment anymore, he smiled, and you're not as terrifying as I thought. They stood together, the stars above them endless, the silence between them no longer hollow, but full of something new. Trust, choice, maybe even hope. The end.